Another cool question from Henry about doing kind of Custdev and mom test on a tight deadline when you have to kind of force things, which makes it harder to have the serendipitous and the casual and the organic conversations. Um, and so Henry is saying like, I've got a couple weeks. I gotta understand this segment, see if it's worth pursuing or not. But if I'm cold calling them, that's going to create a dynamic that's quite formal. It's biasing. They're defensive of their time, and it's going to be tough to have mom test chats. What do you do? This is a place where industry experts can be really, really helpful. So instead of trying to reach directly to the customer, you reach out to people who you have a more credible connection to, who know about the customers, who have experience with the customers. This has advantages and disadvantages. The advantage is that they don't have skin in the game, but they do have a lot of understanding. And so they can give you unbiased answers to a lot of issues. However, they are not your customers. So, what they can't do is reveal these little emotional objections and these little hidden signs about why they're doing this irrational thing, or why they haven't already tried to improve it, or do they really care? The industry experts are great for like, what are the budgets? What do they mainly use? How does this work? Like, what should I be looking out for? Who are the stakeholders? These sorts of like factual industry questions. You can also sometimes ask the industry expert to climb into your shoes. So you can say, hey, we think this has legs, or we think there's something interesting here, but we don't know much about it. We've got this much time to figure it out. If you were in my situation, if you were in my shoes, how would you be running this process? Where would you start? What would you be worried about? And sometimes in this way, it allows them to give you quite negative feedback, or to suggest things that they think are huge risks that you might not fully notice or appreciate, in a way that feels comfortable for them, because they're like, oh, well, what I would do is, or like what I would be scared of. And it creates a much more comfortable dynamic for them to get that to you. Um, in some cases, you can even pay these people for their time. I am never a believer in paying customers to do customer interviews because I believe that introduces too many biases. But with industry experts, it's fine because they don't have skin in the game. You're basically paying them to share their expertise rather than paying them to tell you what they think of your product. Or yeah, right? It's focused on the industry, not on your product. And that seems to be enough of a separation of interests that the payment doesn't overly complicate it. I've done this a little bit in the publishing industry. In publishing, there's a marketplace called Readsy of lots of publishing professionals, editors, book marketers, all of that. Occasionally, when I need expert insight for my business, I just go on Readsy and I hire people for like a 1 hour proposal. And I sort of say like, there's no need to do an onboarding call. Don't spend a bunch of time on this, but like the call is the work, and I'm just gonna pay you your hourly rate. You can charge me a little extra, and I just run an industry expert interview with them. So that's one possible solution. Another is if you can sometimes find people who have recently retired from the industry. So either startup founders who recently sold their business into the industry, or who recently failed their business in the industry, or people who used to work in the industry, senior execs, whoever, and they've recently retired, or they're about to reach retirement. These groups are great because just like the industry expert, they don't have immediate skin in the game. There's very little defensiveness, but they still have quite fresh understanding of the industry dynamics and what's going on and all of that. That's probably where I'd start. Cold calls just don't work, as you noticed, Henry. Like, I mean, Henry, you already know this. You mentioned it in your message. You're like, I can reach them with cold calls, but that's gonna burn the conversation, or ruin the learning options. And I agree. One way you can use cold calls, and this is still a little bit uncomfortable, it's not for everyone, but you can basically treat them as sales calls, and you can try to do some sort of smoke screen where you're selling something, or you're offering some sort of concierge service or consulting or consultation. That can work. Another is try to add value to their side of the equation. So if instead of saying like, I want to interview you, which is all about you can say, hey, I'm interviewing 12 experts in this industry and putting together a white paper. I would love to share it with you. All the data will be anonymized, but you'll be able to benchmark yourself or like get some extra views. Or you say it's not anonymous. Like I'm gonna elevate you as an expert in this industry, and we're gonna release it on my site, and it's gonna be this wonderful thing that people see. You got to follow through on that, which like obviously, or you burn those bridges pretty badly, which is putting a big pile of work on your plate, even if you end up not pursuing this path. So that's something to think about. But this is one of the ways a lot of founders are using podcasts right now, is they're setting up a podcast partially because they'll enjoy it, but also because it gives them excuse to interview all of these people who are normally hard to reach, because then you're balancing out the value equation, because you're saying, yeah, I get some of your time, but you get a little bit of exposure and credibility and this nice little thought leadership piece. And you can go further in that direction if you want to. That's a few ideas. Personally, I would probably start with industry experts. Then I would look for people who have exited or retired. Consider incentivizing them if you need to. And if that's not possible, but the learning's really important, or you can't get the learning you need that way, then potentially look for a way to change the value equation so that you're giving back either some insight or some exposure in return for the conversation. So hopefully that helps, Henry. Thanks again for the question. If anyone else has questions, hop on over to robfitz.com. There's a place there. You ask me and I will answer.